If you have not signed in, I've got the sign-in sheet up here on the table on the left. You don't have to sign in right now, but at least make sure you sign in before you leave. I don't know what they're going to use it for, but I'm sure it's for good purposes, so please do sign in so that we know you attended. Any questions before we get started? Okay, so that's a thumbs up. We'll start. Thank you. Okay, so welcome to Building a REST API using Django and Django REST Framework. My name is Kenny Yarboro, and I've been working with Django and Django REST Framework for a little over a year now. I spent about almost 6 years at IBM doing various automation, some UI work, and level 3 customer support for a product. And then I went to SAS Institute, and they brought me in knowing very little about Python. They brought me in. I quickly got up to speed and started playing around with Django and Django REST Framework to build a REST API so that they could automate various network services. What they were looking to automate initially were the addition of firewall rule additions based on set pre-approvals. And so we built that using Django REST Framework. We had a prototype probably within a month or two, and then we started switching over, making a move toward production. We've seen a lot of success using both of these utilities. And we have, I think, 3 active projects now, all based in Django and Django REST Framework. So we've seen a lot of success with it. And what I'll go through today is kind of some of the things that I've learned about it. And in the process, we'll build our own REST API. All right, so let me see how I'm going to get through the slides here. That's not great. Let's see. There we go. Can everyone see this relatively well? And remember, it is on GitHub so that you can follow along. So we'll start with just some quick introductions. We'll talk about just a little bit about what REST architecture is. Won't go too in-depth. We'll describe what's Django, what's the Django REST framework, and then we'll go ahead and start setting up and building our project. So REST architecture is just an alternative approach to web services. One of those other approaches would be SOAP, that's XML based. REST is typically HTTP based. It's going to support the standard HTTP methods. Those are going to be get, put, post, and delete. It's going to support others, but these are some of the ones that we'll see today. There's a client-server model. Your client's going to send a request. The server's going to get that, do something with it, and send back a response that the client will then receive. REST is also stateless. So the state that the machine is in is going to be determined by the various HTTP links that you send. Then there is also possible to be cacheable on certain actions. So maybe you have some GET action, and for you to process that GET and send information back to the client, you have to do a lot of processing, but the data is not going to change much over time. Well, you can set that to be cached so that you don't have to do all that heavy processing, but every once in a while. So you have that option. REST can also be a layered system, which means that although the client thinks it's maybe talking to the main server, it could actually be going through several intermediary servers before it gets to that main server. And so the request may have to bubble up to the main server and then work its way back to the client. REST is going to give us a uniform interface. It means that if we design something that's RESTful and other developers want to tie into our API, they can do that. We have a uniform interface. It can be language independent. We can use Python today to build our API. Someone else can maybe use Perl or Java or Ruby and build something that consumes our API and talks to it. REST is going to give you the identification of resources. That's typically through a URL or your link. There's a REST approach called, I think it's called Hades. Not sure about that. But it's hypermedia as the engine of application state. My understanding of that is that the state of the machine is just based in that link. And that's what we've already said. I like to think of REST as giving you the option to build plug-and-play services. I can build an API, and then you can plug into it using whatever technology you want, because all you have to do is follow the REST standards. All right, so Django is a high-level Python web framework. For us at SAS, it allowed us to quickly build prototypes. It We've been doing that ahead of most of our applications that we have in the works now. Just build a quick prototype, see how it looks. It's easy to put a little effort in up front. If it works, great, we'll pursue it. If not, throw it away. We haven't done much work with it. So it's been very useful in that aspect. It offers various built-in security. We won't go in depth on that, but we'll see a little bit of it. It is scalable. I think Pinterest is one of the popular sites that uses Django. And then it has a built-in admin interface. We will see a little bit with that. I won't go too in-depth, but we will look at it. It uses, you may have heard of the model view controller approach or architecture. For Django, it's a little bit different. Your model is still a model. It's going to describe the data. Your view is actually going to be a template in Django. We won't touch that at all today because we're not really worried about things looking pretty. And then the controller, where most of your logic's going to be, that would be in the view for Django. We'll see a little bit with the views. Won't do a lot with the logic, but we'll play with those. The Django REST Framework is an extension that's based on Django, and it's going to allow us to build our web API today, our REST API. It's also going to give us a built-in web browsable API. So rather than having to go ahead and code something to our API to play with it, we can play with it in the web. We can immediately make a post action and see the results of that post. And we'll look at that. And then Django REST Framework itself is customizable. You can go with just the basic features of it, or you can get into it and get more advanced. It has that flexibility if you need it. So our setup, I'd recommend that you have Python 2. If you don't, I think you're going to be okay if you're using 3. I believe there are 2 methods in all our code that may be affected, and I'll point those out as we get to them. But I haven't tested it fully on 3, so it is possible there's something else going on there. I went with 2 because at least when I got started, it seemed like there were more libraries that supported 2. Not everything was supporting 3. That's probably changed since last year when I first started looking at this. But also I have 2.7 already loaded on my Mac, so it's just the easiest thing for me to set up. So I took an easy route there. So this may be hard to see. This is great if you can follow along with the slides. Maybe you've downloaded those. That looks terrible. All right, so if you don't have pip, this is instructions on how to get pip. This is basically the package installation for installation manager for Python. It's going to let us download Django REST Framework very easily. So if you don't have pip, you'll want to get that. If you're working on a Windows system, I don't know, there may be some in here with Windows. You're going to have to, if you haven't already, add the wherever your Python location is, there should be a scripts folder there. You need to add that to your system path so that then from your DOS command prompt, when you type Python, it knows what you're doing. So that's something you may need to do. But there's a website to get this file. It's bootstrap.pypa.io. The file you want to get is get-pip.py, and then you just run Python get pip.py. That's going to get that for you. Yes?
You already have Python 3 and everything set up. Is that going to be okay?
You may experience some issues with it, but I'll try to point out where I know that there's a difference. So, does anyone need a moment? Show of hands if you need a moment to get pip. Okay, great. All right, so the first thing we want to do, if you don't already have it, is run pip install virtual env. This is going to allow us to have a virtual environment. So it's not really required, but I recommend it. The idea here is we'll build a virtual environment. This is going to give us kind of a quarantine area that we can work on. And then if later you decide, oh, I hated everything we did in there, I want to wipe it away, all you have to do is delete the folder that you used for today. It won't affect your global Python installation. So you don't have to do this, it's just to make it easier for you. So it's pip install virtual env. All right, so with that, we'll actually go ahead and start running some commands. So I'm going to remove the slides for now. Okay. See if I can get that a little bigger too. Okay. All right, right, so once you are in, there we go. So once you're in whatever folder you want the files that we're working on today to go inside, just go to that folder at the command prompt. And, excuse me. So if you have a virtual env already, we can just say virtual env, and we can give it a name. I'm just going to say venv. So you could use another name, but if you want to follow along with our examples today, venv would be what you'd want to use. So then that does some things for us, setup tools, pip, and if we look, it created a folder, venv, for us. So that's all it's done so far, but that's good. So if you're following along on a Mac, or I think also Linux, we can do dot for the current directory, space, venv, /bin/activate. If you're on Windows, it's a little different. You don't have to use the dot in front. You just would type venv, so I won't run this here, but if you're on Windows, what you're typing is just venv /scripts /activate. So that's if you're on if you're on Windows. All right, so I'm going to run the one I need, venv bin activate. So you'll see our command prompt should change. Should have venv somewhere in there. That just means we're in our virtual environment. Anything we do is going to be restricted to our quarantine section now. So we have that. If you need it to get out of here, we won't run this now because we don't need to, but deactivate will return you to your former prompt. It gets you out of the virtual environment. So just something to keep in mind. We shouldn't need that until we're done. All right, so we'll keep going. Try to get this back here. Okay, so the next two commands we want to run from our virtual environment are pip install, and then we got Django == 1.7.4. 1.8 has been released, but when I put this together, I was playing with 1.7, so I'd rather go with what I know works. Not aware of anything in 1.8 that would break this, but for our purposes, we'll stick with what I tested. Then we have the Django REST Framework. We're going to use version 3.0.4 for that. So it's pip install Django == 1.7.4. And then for Django REST Framework, it's pip install, all one word, all lowercase, Django REST Framework == 3.0.4. And so I will follow along with that. Pip install Django == 1.7.4. So that's good. And then pip install Django REST Framework == 3.0.4. Let's go into do a little bit more. That gives us both of those. Anyone not at that point have any problems? Okay. All right, so this is not meant to be completely perfect view of what we're doing. It's meant to be a rough view so that you can see where we're at and what we're building. Basically, we're going to have at the very top, we have our client. They're going to communicate with our Django web application once we've got it built. And then once a request has reached Django, it's going to look at what's the URL and what do I do with a URL matching certain patterns. We'll see that. And then Django's either going to go to our admin interface based on some link it got, or it's going to go into one of our views or a view set. Now, if it goes to a view or a view set, it's likely going to talk to our serializers that we'll build. But either way, it's going to reach our backend model, which is going to be our data and where we've defined that. And then our model can have validators associated with it, and we'll get to that later on. But we'll build something very similar to this. All right, so next we're going to start a project. So if you haven't changed your directory, you're right where we left off. You're just running django-admin.py. If you're on Windows, you're going to run it as .exe instead of .py. .py may work, but it gives you some trouble if you use .exe on Windows. This works a lot better. I've seen it have more consistent results. But then you're just running start project space tutorial, because that's what I'm calling it. I'd recommend you do that so that everything else we do today will be exactly the same. If you use a different name, you're going to have to type different things in. So let's go at tutorial, then space, and period for the current directory. So I'll go ahead and do the same. Django-admin.py, start project, tutorial, dot. All right, so once I do that, there's no output, but if I check the current directory, I've got some files now, files and folders. I have a manage.py, that's what's going to run our application, and then I have a tutorial folder. So let's go ahead and go inside the tutorial folder. And that's a key thing, because we're going to run another command. If you run this other command outside of the tutorial folder, then the further examples we do will be different for you. So make sure you go inside the tutorial folder. Inside the tutorial folder, we have some more files. There's the settings.py. That's where we're going to configure our application. We'll touch that a little bit today. There's urls.py. That's where it's actually mapping for any URL matching a certain pattern. Here's what we want to do with that. This is where the logic takes us, and we'll do some of those also. And then there's a WSGI, I believe it's called Whiskey file. If we were to set this up on a server, maybe using Apache, then we would point to this Whiskey file, and that's going to run our web server from elsewhere. Django itself has a built-in lightweight web server, not meant for production, and we'll just use that for our purposes today. So those are the files inside the tutorial folder. So next, from within the tutorial folder, just to make that clear, we're going to run django-admin.py, if you're on Windows, .exe, space, start app, all one word, all lowercase, start app, space, and we're going to do all one word, all lowercase, restaurant API. That's the name of the project that we're building. So once again, that's django-admin.py or exe, start app, restaurant API. So I'll go ahead and do that to follow along. Django-admin.py, start app, restaurant API. Yep. Once again, there's no output, but if you check the current directory, we now have a restaurant API folder. So if we go inside the restaurant API folder, we can see that there are several new files here. One is a migrations folder. We'll look at that a little bit. Something introduced in Django 1.7 were migrations. Prior to Django 1.7, I think it was called South. It's just another Django extension. But this is kind of like version control for our database models, which are going to be the models we build. I haven't done a lot with migrations, but it seems to be very powerful. We were already running with Django 1.6 at work, and we haven't upgraded it yet, but it's something I like to play with. If you've never used Django before, at least start at 1.7 if you're not going to start with 1.8, so that you can take advantage of the migrations and leave that as a to-do for yourself. It's supposed to be very powerful. It's supposed to do a lot for you. In addition to that, we've got an admin.py. That's where we can tie in this application into our admin interface. We will touch that a little later. We have our models.py. This is where we can go in and define our models. We have views.py, so we can build our views, put our logic together. And then there's even a test.py file where we could write automated tests if we wanted to. We won't do any testing in here today, not code-wise. So that's what that gives us. I'm going to go ahead and go back up a directory. So I'm inside the tutorial directory still. Okay. So once again, just going back here, you can see that we've got our URLs file. We've got an admin file now for our model. We've got a view file for our model. And then we even have a model file for that model that we're going to build the restaurant API application. So we're starting to see that build itself out. So next, we're going to create our initial database. Django is going to be packaged with SQLite 3. So it's just going to use that, and that's fine for our purposes today. It will work with MySQL and Postgres and possibly some other databases, but definitely those two. So we're going to run, so we're going to have to go up a directory from tutorial. So whatever your main directory is, that's where the manage.py is. We're going to run Python manage.py migrate. Well, it may be make migrate. Yep, migrate. So Python manage.py migrate. And if you're on Windows, this should be the same. There shouldn't be any difference for this. So if we run that, it applies some different things there for the migrations. If we then check the current directory, we now have a db.sqlite3 file. So let's see. Can show a quick side topic here. Let's see. So if you're familiar with, and you may not be, but it's okay. This may be for other browsers, but definitely for Firefox. There's an SQLite Manager plugin you can get. And yeah, I know that one doesn't. Let's see. And what I can do is I can actually use this plugin to open the database file for our application. And so I'll do that and show you what that looks like. So here I've just opened the database file. Not a lot to see just yet. Like see, there's a users table in there, auth_user. That's in our database right now. But it's not populated, but it is there. And for that, there are fields ID, password, last login, or your super user, username, first name, last name, email, and then if you're staff. And we'll see some of that in a bit. But that can be nice to use. It's in no way required for today. Let me get rid of that. Okay. All right, so next we'll actually create a super user, which would populate the database for us. We're going to do Python manage.py, and then all one word, all lowercase, create super user. So it's Python manage.py, create super user. So I'll go ahead and do that. Python manage.py, create super user. It's going to ask for a username. I just recommend using your name. Or if you want to follow along my example, I'm going to use Kenny. So it's up to you. If I'm okay if you use my name. I don't have a copyright on it. I'll actually reveal it. You can put an address if you want. You don't have to, but I'll go ahead and put kenny.yarboro@gmail.com. Password, I'm going to use Kenny today. So I don't use it anywhere else, though. All right, so that gives us our super user, Kenny, or your name. All right, so next, we'll go ahead and actually start our project. So we can do that with Python manage.py, run server. That's all lowercase, all one word, run server. Now I'm doing something special here. I'm doing hyphen or dash no reload, all one word, all lowercase. What that's going to say is if the code changes while the server's running, I'm not going to have it reload the updated code. So you can do that, but for our purposes today, I want us to actually start the server, and when we want to make a change, we're going to stop the server. That's just for our purposes today. You may not want to do that in your own time, but for today, I thought it would be easier to do. So let's go ahead and run that. So it's going to be Python manage.py, run server. I'm doing hyphen no reload. So I'll go ahead and run that. It's going to capture my console. That's okay. We can Control-C out of it when we're ready. There's nothing we're going to type while our server's running anyway, as far as the command. It's going to say that we're running at our local host, so we can go ahead and go into the web browser and look at that. So let me get that pulled up. Let's see. So this is what you should have. If everything's running correctly, there are no problems, it should say it worked. So you now built a Django application. I thank you for your time. So we'll do a little bit more though. Okay, so let's go ahead and we can also see in the output here we ran git commands. So it's just running git commands behind the scenes. So we'll go ahead and control C out of that. That stopped our server. So we're good there. So now we'll get into building an actual restaurant menu. So we're going to get into the requirements for that. We'll build it. We'll create the database, and then we'll generate some data for our application. All right, so types of users. Who wants to use a restaurant API? This is the interactive portion. You can make suggestions.
Search engine.
Yep. Okay. Search. Oh, that's good. Yep. But so that makes sense. Those would be kind of general users that they don't necessarily need to be authenticated to our API. So it makes sense. Could call those customers or consumers. Anyone else that would use our API? Right. You could have some internal application calling the API. That's good. So, any other thoughts? Yeah. Yeah, other applications. Right. Managers. Yeah, very good. So, managers are good. We need them to put data in there, manage things. Let's go ahead and bundle the managers with the administrators. We're going to say that the managers for our restaurant are very tech savvy, so they're also going to administrate our application. So anyone else that would use it. We've got the other users. That would be anyone consuming our API. And then we got managers or admins. They're going to have to authenticate to our API because we can't just let anyone be, oh, are you a manager? Okay, we'll take your word for it. We don't want to do that. So we need one other group, though. So we have users as kind of the other, but so if we're building restaurant menus, who's going to make the menus? I mean, the managers can. The chefs, let's have some chefs. So, because maybe the managers aren't as kitchen savvy as they are tech savvy. So let's have chefs use it too. So that's what we'll go forward with for our general users. So for components of the menu, what's going to be on the menu? Food. So we'll call it like a menu item, some menu items on there. So what does a menu item have on it? Well, that could be good. That could be maybe a description of it. We need a name. We need to know what it is. So name, price, yeah. So how much does it cost us to make it? And maybe how much are we selling it for? And hopefully that's more than what it costs to make. So, all right, so we'll go forward with that. So here, types of users. We've got admins and managers grouped together. We're going to let them manage the application. They can manage menus, and then they can also manage the users and permissions for those users. That seems reasonable to me. And then for the chef, we're just going to let them maintain the menu. They don't need to focus on the users. We want them focused on the food. So, and then customers or other, they can just view our menu for now. That's all we're going to have for today. We can expand on that later, but that's going to be beyond our scope today. All right, so for the user and group models, we actually have those by default in Django. They've already got them. We saw one of the user tables already. So we can just leverage what Django already has versus doing this ourselves. This is going to give us built-in user management, built-in password encryption, built-in authentication, and then built-in group permissions. All that built-in, we didn't have to do anything for it. It's just there. For the menu model, we're going to look at having an ID, so just some unique identifier. We'll just leave it as ID. We'll have a name. That's just some text. Same for a description. And then we're going to have a chef. And the chef, we're going to make them a foreign key for an actual user, one of the built-in user models that Django offers. So then we can tie in this menu was owned or created by this chef. And then available, true or false. Is this menu available? Because we can write logic later on that says, I only want to pull out the available menus. If someone's consuming our API says, hey, what's on your menu today? This would be a good way for us to restrict what shows up if they're consuming that API view. All right, and then built on top of that, under that is the menu item. Here, another ID, so just some unique identifier. We'll give it a name, a description. Here we have a cost to make and a sale price. We use real numbers for that. And then, once again, available. Is that menu item available or not? And this is going to have a foreign key of a menu. So this menu item is attached directly to an existing menu. So it ties it all together for us. All right, so next we'll go ahead and build the models.py file. So we'll add the menu model. So here we're going into tutorial/restaurant API/models.py to build this. So I'll go ahead and do the same here. Oh, not showing up because I got that. There we go. Right, so we've got the models.py file, we've got that pulled up. One of the first things we're doing is we're importing from django.contrib.auth.models. We're going to import user. That's the built-in user model that Django gives us. So that pulls that in for us. We didn't have to do anything. We're going to define the class, so we'll call it menu. It's going to inherit from models.model. And then here's where we're actually putting the fields in for the model. And this is going to map directly to the database. So we're going to create a database table that will be exactly what we're entering in here. It's going to do it all for us. So name equals models.charField. We're going to use that for characters. Set a max length. I'm going to use just 32. And then unique equals true. So that's going to restrict us from adding menus with the same name. And we do that just with unique equals true. And that's going to set it as a database constraint. For the char field, I think max length may be the only thing that's actually required. But we're using unique for our purposes. So description, also a char field. And for it, we're just doing max length. I'm going to set that to 200 just in case the description is longer. From there, chef equals, here's models.foreign key. And then that foreign key is going to be the user. This is the user object built into Django. So we've set that as the foreign key. And then available, it's going to be models.boolean field. And we're going to set a default to false. We're going to say if it's available, we will specifically note that it is available. Now this next part is specific to Django 2, to Python 2. If you have Python 3, it's a different method. I forget the exact way we would name it. But there is an equivalent in Python 3. So it may be a side thing for you to Google. But you don't have to put this in at all. We'll see how it works in Python 2. If you're on Python 3, you may just want to note this as a to-do to come back and look at and just not type in the Unicode method. It's not going to hurt you if you don't. So we'll return a Unicode value of, and I just use this format because I've seen this in all the examples I've looked at. But %s by %s by %s, and we'll then send in a tuple of self.name, and let me go down here so it's easier to see. Self.chef.firstname. So what this is for the instance in which this is called on, it's going to say for that instance, for the chef value there, which is a user object, then pull out the first name from the user object. That's what we're doing there. And we're going to do the same thing for last name. What this does is if we have an instance of a menu object, We have that, maybe it's a variable, or maybe we're showing it in our admin interface. If we call a string, call str on that, this is what it's going to give us back. We've defined what we want it to say. So you don't have to do that. It can be nice, be useful for other people. All right, so we got that in there. And then we can go ahead and continue to slide 24 and add the menu item model. So we'll do class menu item. And for the menu item, also extending from models.model. And then from here, we can say name equals models.char field. Max length equals, I'll do 32 again, and unique equals true. So very similar to the name of the menu. Description, we'll do that just like the menu. That's going to be a max length 200. And then we'll do cost underscore to underscore make. That's going to be a decimal field. And for decimal field, we have to define decimal places. I'm going to say 2 because I'm trying to treat it just like real money. So decimal places equals 2. And then we also have to define max digits. I'm going to say our restaurant isn't that expensive, so I'll cap it at 5. And then we'll do sell underscore price and do that exactly the same way. Models dot decimal field, decimal places equals 2, and then max digits equals 5. And then here, once again, there's that Unicode. If you're on Python 3, if you just want to ignore it, it's completely fine. And here it's a lot simpler. We'll do just 1% s, and we'll just pass in self.name. So. Right, so I'll go ahead and save that. Give everyone another moment to get there, just in case. And so we'll see these get created, and I missed something, didn't I? I missed 2 things. So good thing I didn't go ahead too far. It's going to be the result of us calling a string on this object. So, and we'll see that in play in probably a few minutes. So I missed a couple here. Available. We want that on there. So models.boolean field. And I'll set a default of false again. Just preference. And then we have to set menu equals models.foreign key, and we can just say menu. We don't have to import anything in for menu because it's already defined right above this class. It's already available for us. So we just do menu. And now let me save that again. So the way migrations are supposed to work are, if I'd forgotten this, I should have been able to just go back in, add it, even if the database table was already created, and using the migrations, it should have updated the database, added the new fields for me. So I don't want to get into that for today's tutorial because we're not talking about migrations. But it should have caught that for us. All right, so with that, we'll keep going. The next thing we want to do is modify the settings.py file. So settings is going to be in our tutorial folder. There's a lot of information already in there. It's already got a security key that you should keep secret. You know, mine's here on display, but I won't use it elsewhere. So what we're looking for, it's probably on line 32 or so, is installed apps. This is our Django settings for what do you actually need to pull in, what's actually going to run. And what we want to do, and I'll just add it at the end, is add tutorial.restaurant API. and then put a comma at the end there. So tutorial.restaurant API. And that's just the application we've built. Our project is tutorial, our application restaurant API. We're just telling Django we like to use this. So I'll save that. All right, so with that, anyone still need a few minutes for the models or the settings? It's okay? All right, we'll give it another moment.
REST API should be directly under tutorial, correct?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually did the same thing. I ended up removing tutorial from the four-part of restaurant API. Is that just how, I guess you have it structured a little differently than that?
So if restaurant API is not in tutorial, then you probably didn't run the Django admin command from within the tutorial folder. Yeah, so it should work, but if you experience issues, we may have to look at it during the break or something. Alternatively, if you want to just move it in there or something, that might be fine too. So we haven't done anything major with it yet, so if you just move the folder, it's probably okay. I think it uses it for maybe some of the, if it's not using it for encryption, it could be using it for the cross-site request forgery. So it has CSRF protection built in, and we could probably see it if we opened two different tabs and logged into one in our application once we get to that point, and then go to another one and try to do something different. But it's built-in cross-site request forgery, so it could be related to that. I haven't delved too deep into it. Something to be aware of. I'd tag it as a follow-up item. Okay. That's in settings.py. Yeah. So. And then that's also on slide 25. So if you're on slides here, let's see. Slide 25 right there. That's probably harder to see than the code I had up here, but that's where we're at for slide reference. All right, so we'll go ahead to slide 26. Bring that back. So we're going to run Python managed.py make migrations, all lowercase, all one word. And now because we've told Django about the application we've built, it's going to be able to look at those models and make the migrations for us. So we'll tell it to make the migrations, and then we'll tell it to migrate. And what that's going to do is it's going to prepare to put this in the database, and then we're actually putting it in the database. All right, so we'll run that. Nope, not that one. There we go. So this would be from your main code directory where the manage.py file is. Python manage.py make migrations. And we see it created the model menu, and it created the model menu item. And it's versioned at 0001. So once we've done that, we can say Python manage.py migrate. And then it will apply that migration for us. It mentions that. Let's see. Yep. So it put restaurant API in there. It mentioned some of the admin things. It probably put information in there pertaining to our new model. So we've got that. So at this point, let's go ahead and run Python manage.py run server space, and for our class purposes, -- no reload. So we'll go ahead and run that. Okay, so with the server running, we can go back to our local host. Doesn't look like it changed, but we can do a little more with it. So localhost :8000. Let's do slash or /admin. So just /admin on the end of localhost :8000. And there we go. We have our admin interface. That's built in. We didn't have to build it, so it just gave it to us. So let's log in as our super user. For me, that's going to be Kenny. So if nothing else, you'll remember my first name at the end of this. So, all right, so we have here groups and users tables already. We have quick buttons where we can add users or groups and change. So let's just go ahead and click on users. And we can see here, there's Kenny, there's an email address. I didn't give Kenny a first name or last name yet, so I'd like to do that, especially because it's going to result in an error in our code when it tries to get the first name, last name, and it's not there. So let's go ahead and say Kenny Yarboro, or if you're using your name, you can do that too. For me, I've got Kenny Yarboro. Also within here, there's a password. You can see it's encrypted. There's the algorithm information on how it's encrypted. My username's there. I could change it if I wanted to. Email address is here. I can change that if I want. And then here's permissions. Am I an active user? So if you wanted someone not to have access, just remove them from active if you still needed to keep their entry there. Staff status. Staff status means, can this person log into the admin interface? If that's selected and they have an account, then they can log in. And if not, then they can't. And then super user status says you have permission for everything. If you didn't want to give super user status, you could then create your own groups and assign someone a group to give them a group of permissions. Or here are all the available permissions that you could give them individually. So you have a lot of options for setting this up. The ones that pertain to us, let's see, not seeing them right now. Oh, there we go. So here's our restaurant API. It added those permissions here for us. Whether or not someone can add, change, or delete a menu or a menu item. It gave that to us. So at this point, the only thing I wanted to do was add first name and last name. So I'll save that. There's a first name, there's a last name. So I've got that in there. So at this point, before we do anything else, I'm just going to go ahead and log out. I'll go back to the login again. But let's kill the server and do a little more. So I'm going to Control-C out of that. And go to my cheat sheet here. Okay. So let's go ahead and create a menu and a menu item. Let's do Python, manage.py, and then shell, S-H-E-L-L. We're going to get a Python shell with access to everything in our project. So we'll do that, Python, manage.py, shell. So now we have our prompt right here. The first thing we want to do is we want to pull in the user object that's built into Django. So let's do that. From django.contrib.auth.models. So this is very similar to the code we wrote earlier. So it's from django.contrib.auth.models. Import capital U for user. So that's just going to give us access to the user model. And then we're going to want to do, we need our menu model and our menu item model. So let's go ahead and pull those in. We can do from tutorial.restaurant API. So from tutorial.restaurant API, import, and here we'll just do star. We'll just say import everything in there. So it gives us everything that we wrote, which is our menu and our menu item model. We have those accessible to us now. So next, let's go ahead and query the database. So I'm going to say Kenny equals capital U for user dot objects dot get. And in the get, I'm going to do parentheses, username equals a single quote, Kenny, another single quote, close parentheses. So it's Kenny, or if you're doing your name, then your name, equals user.objects.get, and then username equals whatever the username was. So for me, it's Kenny, so that's all I put there. And that's actually going to query the database for us. So I'll go ahead and say enter. And now if I was to print the string of Kenny, then it says Kenny. So I've got our user object. If I just do Kenny, it just says that this is a user object. I can do Kenny.id, The ID for that entry is number 1. It's the only user we have, so that's what I would expect. But I now have this user object, and we'll see that come into play. So let's now, we'll go ahead and say, let's see. Well, let's go ahead and create another user this way. So I'm going to say Gordon. I don't know if you know Gordon Ramsay. I don't know him personally, but I like him. So I'm going to say Gordon equals user. And what do we need to define the user? We're going to need username. I'm going to set it to Gordon. We're going to need, let's see, is staff. I'll say true. And let's see, first name equals Gordon. And last name equals Ramsey. I think we can get by with that. So I'm just going to declare someone to be our chef. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm not setting a password yet, and we'll get into that later on. But just creating a user object based on the built-in Django user, setting the username, setting Gordon to be a member of the staff, setting his first name and his last name. So just press enter, and now I can do Gordon.save, and then open and close parentheses. And if you don't get an error, if you follow my example, you shouldn't have. So, and then if I just say Gordon.id, Gordon.id is now 2. So I've created a new user. I've saved that user to the database. It's put it in the database. And because it's put it in the database now, I have an ID associated with it. So it gave that back to me. If you were creating a model and you needed some other unique identifier and you did not want to call it ID, you can create an auto field. And if you create an auto field, which could be another number, maybe I wanted to call it user index or something like that. Well, by default, Django's only going to return an ID if there's an ID in that model. So if you want something differently used, you have to use an auto field in your model. And so Django will then know, oh, this is the value I need to return. So that may or may not be something you encounter if you explore this later. All right, so I've got a new user, Gordon. So now let's go ahead and create a menu, and I'll do a breakfast menu. So I'll say breakfast equals capital M for menu, and then we just have to populate our menu fields. So name, I'm going to call it breakfast, maybe breakfast by Gordon. And then for description, I'll say really tasty. And then for chef, we just say chef equals, in my case, I'm just going to say Gordon. I created Gordon. He's the chef. I already have an instance of that user, so I can use that for the foreign key. Yes? Sure. No, sure. Is that better? Good? Okay. Sorry? Okay. So I think that's as far as it's going to go there. Let's see. That probably made it worse for you. So. Okay. Yep. All right, so I've got chef equals Gordon, and I need something else in there. Available equals true. So I don't have to put quotes around that. It's just a true false Boolean value. So I can say this menu is available. And that should be enough for the breakfast. So let's see. And I did something odd there. Menu is not defined. Say again? Oh, I didn't import models. You're right. So let me try this again. From tutorial.restaurant API.models, we'll import everything. And now we'll try it again. All right, that worked. Good catch. Thank you. All right, so once you've created the object, we'll go ahead and save that object so that it will put it in the database for us. So just breakfast.save, open and close parenthesis. Breakfast.id is going to give us 1, which makes sense. We didn't have a menu until we did this, so I would expect the unique ID for it to be 1. So now that we have a menu, let's go ahead and add a menu item for this menu. So for this one, I'm going to add an omelet. and say omelet equals capital M for menu and capital I for item, menu item. Then open parentheses, we've got to give it some values. Name equals omelet. And then description, I'm going to say yummy. And we've got to do cost underscore to underscore make. I'll say that this costs $1 to make. So 1.00. And then to sell, I'm going to do a sell price. Sell underscore price equals, I'm going to say we'll sell it for 3. So 3.00. And then the last thing is available equals true. I'll say, yes, this is available. Close parentheses at that point and press enter. So we've created our omelet object, and now we can save it to the database. Omelet.save, open close parentheses. And I missed the menu. So let's try it again there. Menu is equal to breakfast because that was their menu object. So forgot to put that on my cheat sheet. All right, so now let's try that again. Omelet.save. All right, that worked. So omelet.id, ID for omelet is 1. It's our first menu item. It should be 1. So I'm happy with that too. So that's a way that you can go about creating things programmatically. That works on shell. That'll work also just in your regular code. Another way, if you remember when we did the user, we did a get. I could say menus equals menu.objects.all. I did something like that, and then menus would give us we have a list of menus. So that would be a way to get all the objects from the database for us at once. It would run that query. It's kind of like a select all. And then here we see we have a list, and we can see that it's calling a string on our menu object. So it's saying breakfast by Gordon. I must have typed by again or something. So that's my fault on there. But we could also do item, maybe item equals menu item dot objects dot filter. So this will show you the difference between the get and the filter. So if I do a filter on name equals omelet, just do that. And then item is going to be a list of whatever matched that filter. So the get is just going to send back one entry. Whereas if you do a filter, you're just going to get a list of anything that matched. So on your get, if it doesn't find a match, it's going to raise an exception that you have to catch. On your filter, if it finds nothing that matches, you just get an empty list. So that's just something to keep in mind. All right, but at this point, we're good with the command line. So I'll go ahead and exit, and I'm back here. So now that I've exited, I'm going to go ahead and run the server again. So it's Python manage.py, run server, -- no reload. And let's go back to our browser. I'll refresh that. I'm going to log in as Kenny. And I'm going to go into users first. And I'm just going to go ahead and I see Gordon's in here. And I want to give Gordon a password. So you can see now there's no password set for Gordon. But Django gives us a form to give him a password. So I'll do that. And I'm just going to give him the password Gordon. I'll change the password. And then I got message password changed successfully. Okay, so we've got that. That's good. So we're running ahead of schedule because everyone seemed to do really well with their setup. So would you like to break early, or would you like to do a little from section 2 now and then still break at 10:30? No real preferences? Okay. Let's do a little bit now so I can show you a little extra, and then we'll save the second half purely for the rest work. So, all right, so what we want to do is skip ahead to slide 34. And we'll talk about the admin interface a little bit. So it's built in. We've seen it used. We've already started playing with it. We didn't have to do anything. It's just there for us. It's really powerful. You get a lot for little effort. It's customizable. We could actually go in, make it prettier, do different things with it. We probably won't do a lot with that here, but it's got permissions. I've talked about those. Another thing is, depending on what you're building, the admin interface itself could be your user interface. One of our active projects right now is a reporting system for employees to enter in updates on projects and things, and then to submit those to their manager, who can then get a list of what are all the updates for all the people that report to me. And we're just using the user interface, the admin interface from Django as our user interface for that project. There are several Django extensions out there that will actually pretty it up even better than it looks now. So you get kind of a more modern look. So a lot of flexibility with it. So what we want to do, though, is, because we don't always want to use the command line shell to add new menus, new menu items, new users. Well, users are already supported in the admin interface, but let's get our menus and our menu items in the admin interface. So to do that, we're going to go into the admin.py file, and we're going to add the following code to set up a menu admin and a menu item admin. So once again, this is on slide 35. So I'll go ahead and code along with you. Going into admin.py. So we have to do an import. So from tutorial.restaurantapi.models, something I missed earlier, .models, import menu, menu item. If you don't want to type menu, menu item, the asterisk is fine. It's just showing you the different ways to do this. And then from here, I just do class menu admin. That's capital M for menu, capital A for admin, and then open parentheses, lowercase admin dot model admin with a capital M for model, capital A for admin. Gonna inherit from there, and we're just gonna do pass. We're just gonna say, hey, we don't want to do anything different, but we've got to throw a pass in there. We're just gonna take it as is. We're gonna do the same thing for menu item. Just call it menu item admin. Other than that, it's exactly the same. Do another pass. So we've defined our admin views. We're just using them as their default. Nothing custom here. But now we need to register those. So we do admin.site.register. And then when we register it, we have to associate a model with that admin view. So for the first register, I'll just do menu, menu admin. For the second one, I'll do menu item, menu item admin. So I've registered both of those. So the question you may have, or that I like you to have, is what if you want to use the same model for more than one admin view, which that can come up pretty common. Well, you can't do that, not just as is. What you'd have to do is declare another model, and there's a meta class on it that you have to set it as proxy equals true. So you're basically creating a proxy model, and then you can essentially use the same model that way with another admin view. So just something to keep in mind. So I like it to be a little bit different, but that's still not too much to ask. At least we do have the option for it. All right, so now that we have that, let's go ahead and save. And let's go ahead and restart our server. So Control C, and then just restart. And let's go back to our browser where I was still logged in. Okay. So we can now see Restaurant API, menu items, and menus. If you don't like how these show up as pluralized, you can actually, there's a meta class setting. I think it's verbose name plural, where you can set that. So if our model actually ended with an S, it would have two S's here. So that's something you may need to use there. So here we have menus, menu items. So let's look at menus. We see we have Breakfast by Gordon Ramsay. I messed something up when I typed that in. So that's there. And then if we click on it, we can actually go in. We can see the name, see the description. There's a drop-down select for who the chef is. That's just showing all users. There's even a plus I can use to, from right here, go ahead and add a new user. There's a checkbox for available. All that's built in. We didn't have to tell Django how to show this. It just said, well, oh, it's a Boolean value. We'll give you a checkbox. So it does a lot for us. There's save and add another, save, continue editing, just to save. There's even delete. So we can do management of these from here. Then if we go back to menu items, same thing. We see our omelet. It shows up. If we go in there, we can see things for the cost. There's up, down. I'm not going to save this, but just to show it. And it does that just because we have a decimal field there. So it's doing a lot for us. These forms are customizable, so you can come in, you can add fields that are actually not on the model, that maybe you do some magic behind the scenes with them, and you use some other field to determine what actually gets saved to the model. There's a lot of things you can customize here. You can also throw in JavaScript and do things. You can have dynamic forms. So there's a lot of flexibility that's beyond our scope, but just something to be aware of. And then there's a menu here where we can select with the drop-down selection any menu to associate this with. So it's doing a lot for us. But for me, the list view here doesn't really show me a lot. So let's see how we can change the list view. So I'll just log out for now. And I'm going to kill the server and move to slide 36. Which is going to be adding specific fields to the list view. So we'll do that. So we're going back to admin.py, and we're just replacing the pass. Instead, I'm going to say list display equals. I'm going to set up a list and do ID, name, description, and then I'll go down so it's easier to see. Chef, and available. These are all the field names that we've already set up on the model. I'm just using those. What if you wanted to display a column in the list that wasn't on the model? You can do that. You just name it, and then you set up a method inside this menu admin class, and you could say return hello, whatever you wanted it to do, and it would put that into that column for each row that shows up in the list view. So a lot of flexibility again. So let's do the same thing for menu item, list underscore display equals, and then our list, ID, name, description, and then we've got cost underscore to make, and then sell price, and available, and finally menu. Once you've got that, you can save it. Go ahead and restart your server. Go back into your admin view and check it out. I'll leave this up for a moment just for anyone else still following along. All right, let me see what happens up here. I don't recall seeing that one. And you get that when you go to the admin interface? No, I get that when I start my server. Okay. All right, so I don't get that, but that's okay. Let me come take a look. Okay, where's your code for it?
I tried it without custom make and it worked.
And on your model, is that exactly what you've got, cost to make?
You can keep going. I can.
Okay. All right, we're ahead on time, so it's okay. Yeah, go back to the admin. You got an error with that? Okay. And that looks good there, though. running 2.7. Okay. So kill your server and try it again. Oh, okay. Go back to the admin file. There it is. So you want menu admin. That should do it. No. So that menu first, and then right here, menu should just be menu admin. Yeah. No, it's fine. That should do it. Anyone else? Questions? Anything? Okay. All right. So my server's running. Gonna go back to the admin. Sign in. Right, so now if I go to menus, I have columns there, so I can easily see all the data that I want to see. So if you're building some report for management and they need to see data, they're going to want to see the information there versus having to click more times to see it. So really powerful. Also available, it's going to give us a green check mark. If it was not available, it gives us a red X. So it does that by default, which I think is nice. So menu items, similarly, right there. All right, so at this point, we're still running a few minutes ahead, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and do an early break, and then when you come back, we'll actually go into the REST API. We'll get into that. There's a lot of coding there, so if we, with extra time, we'll save it for the REST part. So if you want to step out and be back at, say, at 10:35, and we'll continue. If you have questions, you want to stick around, that's fine. I'll stay in here just in case.